We're going to go from talking about data and this national level to talking more specifically about people who are working in rural communities, both personal and professional experiences. Please join me on the stage. Thank you. So I'll introduce our panelists. First, we have Jen Giovannitti, and she is president of the Claude, Worthington, Benedum Foundation, and all the bios are in your packet. Then we have Ed Sivak, who is the executive vice president of policy and communications at Hope Enterprise Corporation and Hope Credit Union, and Serena Woodard, who is the 2018 4-H Youth in Action Agricultural Pillar winner. She's a senior in high school, so I imagine graduation is happening soon, and you're off to college. So we decided for this panel, where we really want to connect with the data and the information that you heard from the poll from Bob and Joe, but we really want to start this conversation and get more down on the ground and talk to people who are living and working in rural communities. And I want to first give our three panelists a chance to tell you all more about what they do, what their work is, and what their experiences have been. And as you're doing that, if you can, make connections to the data that you just heard about, and connect that with the kind of work you're doing. So, Jen, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to thank you for sharing this great information and hosting this poll, because the more we can learn about our rural communities, the more it can help all of the work that we do. The Claude Worthington Benedum Foundation is actually going into its 75th year next year. We are a private family foundation based out of Pittsburgh, and our investment region covers all of West Virginia and rural southwestern Pennsylvania. So in doing the work that we invest in, it is deeply rural, and we focus on health, education, community, and economic development. So with those four strategic areas, you can see why this polling information is so important, because we overlap with the core issues that are being discussed in health, but also the social determinants of health, and how even the survey data around financial stability and close-knit, engaged commitment to communities in rural America is really what we see every day. Some of the anecdotal sides that I'll just share quickly before passing it on to Ed is that the access issue that came out of this data is certainly something we see every day. I'd like to explore that a little bit more as we move on, because I think there's aspects to it that are really frustrating for where we can make better gains, but we aren't doing that right now. And I just, on a positive note, want to say the satisfaction level of people living in rural America and trying to really build upon that as a shining point is important to us, because rural communities are special, they are quaint, they are closely tied to people, and this is why the work that we do at Benedum is so fulfilling, because rural America has so many really beneficial aspects to it, and yet when you try to take data and overlap it, large data sets into rural, it's glitchy, it's incomplete, it's hard to suss out. And so oftentimes the default is to move into suburban and rural and urban data and leave rural behind. So I thank you for doing this, and I think we'll explore more of the issues in a bit.
Great, thank you. Ben?
Good morning. Good morning. Well, again, thank you for having Hope represented here on this panel today. It's great to be here and to share our perspective. The mission of Hope Enterprise Corporation, Hope Credit Union, is to improve the quality of life by improving access to high-quality financial products and services throughout the Deep South. Hope, our region, the Deep South, is also home. Is the epicenter of the civil rights movement. We very much see our work as an extension of the civil rights movement. We are also home to the epicenter of persistent poverty. Places where the poverty rate has exceeded 20% for 3 decades in a row. You can't talk about our region without linking these two together. Equity is an incredible driver of our work. If you look at the counties in our region, of 50 majority black counties, 45 of those are persistently poor. So that is why we do our work. We engage in small business development and housing. We engage in the development of healthcare facilities and schools. We engage in work in small towns. And so again, it's a privilege to be here. We're also a member-owned financial institution. I think that's an important distinction, a marker of who we are. As a credit union, every member has one vote. Our members vote for our governance. Our members set the path for our financial institution. A couple of findings that really stood out to me. First of all, I was really pleased that there was subgroup analysis in this report. So the finding of 49% of rural Americans having a problem of paying off an expense was noted earlier. If we look at black rural Americans, that rate jumps to 68%. It jumps 19 percentage points. And that's consistent with our experience. If you look at where we have branches, if you look at our members, there was a community where the last bank in town was closing, a community of 2,000 people. And you know, when the bank closed, the bank was neither allowing people to open checking accounts nor taking applications for loans. The day we opened our doors, an individual walked 2 miles to take out a loan just to get enough money to fix his truck so that he could get to work. Again, this is about making sure people have the resources to get to work, to thrive in their community. The other finding that I think also stood out was, 8% of all rural Americans reported a hospital closure in their community. However, again, if you look at the subgroup analysis, I think the findings stuck out. For Native communities, that number jumped to 16%, and for black rural Americans, the number jumped to 17%. These gaps don't happen by accident. They're a function of policy choices, of the structural racism within our decision making that occurs. And so I think, again, by having this subgroup analysis, it sets the stage for us to talk about those things. I want to end on a high note, and I'll use this to set up some stories later on in the panel discussion. The finding that gave me the most hope was this one. 62% of people believe that they can have an impact on their community in rural places. And for those of us who live and work in rural communities, that's no shock to all of us. And I think that is the stat in this poll that gives us a foundation on which to build and continue our work.
Thank you. Serena, you want to talk a little bit about the work that you're doing in rural communities and your activism in rural communities? I think you could speak to what Ed just talked about too.
Yes,
right?
yeah, little I can. So I would just like to say thank you for having us here. I am here representing 4-H and National 4-H Council, and we're honored to be here with you all today for this conversation. In 4-H, as she said, I am a senior in high school. I actually just graduated last week, I believe it was, so yeah. But yes, since 2012 through 4-H, I have been teaching what I call Woodard's workshops, and that is because I noticed in my rural community, not a lot of people had general ag education. They didn't have that knowledge of ag and why it's important to society. And so that is why I started teaching my Woodard's workshops. And I go around to ages 3 to 18, and I just taught basic lessons of why do we need bees? Why do we have beekeepers? What are the parts of a pig? How can you garden? Things like that. And then as I got older, I started to see the food insecurity in my hometown. And we also have a lot of families, not only in my neighborhood, but throughout my whole county in Oklahoma, that are either one-car families or families that don't have vehicles at all. So, for example, every day going to school or coming back from a 4-H meeting or something along the lines of that, you will see a family out walking, carrying grocery bags, or riding bikes home because they had no other way to get to the store. So through that, I started to teach container gardening, hydroponics, how you can transplant from something you bought at the store into your yard, things like that, in case it ever comes to that point where they don't have a store. Because along with the no vehicle, our closest supermarket is 45 minutes away from my neighborhood. And then going off of the findings and off of what Ed said, the low health care is a true thing. I cannot speak for all rural communities, but I can speak for mine. and the closest hospital is over an hour away. So an example that I can use of that is my grandma. She has a long history of medical issues. And one time we were out working outside and she fell and gashed her leg, a big gash on metal. And so obviously she needed attention right then. So my grandpa called 911 and they actually gave him another line that he had to call because they couldn't help him. And so obviously that wasted some time and things like that. But my dad at the time was a volunteer firefighter, so he knew basic first aid to help my grandma. And then once we finally got her to the hospital, which was probably about 2.5 hours, because it probably took about an hour for the ambulance to get there, they said that the reason she didn't go unconscious or anything like that is because my dad had that basic knowledge. So I definitely think that the healthcare is something that we need to look at for rural communities.
So Jen, I know that was also an issue that you wanted to talk about too. Is what are the healthcare access issues that you are experiencing and working off of what Serena just said?
Yeah, so progressing rural, I think one of the things that we're all interested in is seeing how technology and telemedicine can really provide, a new alternative. And I was surprised in the data, actually, that the broadband response wasn't higher for non-public broadband.
I was
So maybe
surprised,
this
too.
is the Appalachian
No, so were we.
aspect.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that is, this is, again, just a huge equity issue for me,
Yeah.
and I think that many of us in this room, where the educational divide and the healthcare divide, where you're providing services, we could solve a lot of this if we had better access to broadband and if we would invest in these ways. But yeah, we had a small group at dinner last night talking about this very issue with telemedicine, and I even learned new aspects of how difficult it is. I've got our health program officer in the room, Kim Tiemann, who's been working hard on this. So we have done a lot of granting to support telemedicine because it's very beneficial for chronic disease, stroke, kidney disease, lots of chronic disease. But we were also talking about it into the need for behavioral and mental health services, and how there still are very difficult policy hurdles, even for federally qualified health centers, to have telemedicine intermixed with their current operations. And this just seems like something we can solve as a group. So that's one aspect of providing it currently, in addition to the fact that we just lack broadband. And that's a national investment that needs to be made to advance education and health, and just business, the working from home. Because one of the things about the job and financial security piece also for me relates to what are good sustainable jobs versus a job. So that data surprised me, and I would think it would be higher for Appalachia for sure.
So Ed, did you have thoughts about how the broadband issue is impacting? You talked a little bit about in financial ways, and what about for small business owners and that?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I think when I think of broadband, I think about, again, access to financial services.
Right.
As the world is evolving, so is the way we interact with our financial institution. And at the same time, I also think it's important that that conversation doesn't substitute the importance of having a physical bank branch in one's community. When we were able to open up a branch in Moorhead, Mississippi, the conversation very quickly became one of access to financial services. The mayor, when we said, "What do you need, Mayor?" He said, "How about an ATM?" I know that's not directly associated with broadband, but I think I want to just make sure that we talk about the myriad types of infrastructure that are important to have to create a high quality of life in a rural community. So the other thing that we know is that our members, they use smartphones at high levels of use, at very high use rates. And again, that becomes a way to not just engage with one's financial institution, but also a way to manage one's money. We actually saw our non-sufficient fund fees go down when we launched our mobile app, and it was because people were checking their balances on their phone before making a purchase that might overdraft an account or writing a check. And so You share that story to underscore the importance of access to it, particularly when it comes to financial services.
Yeah, and being in a state where calls are dropped so regularly, this is important and concerns me. We talked on our call that there's a big bank merger going on right now between SunTrust and BB&T, and everything that Ed's saying is concerning us about the rural impact of that, because this will now become the 6th largest bank in America, and the rural communities being currently served and will be pushed into more online services just as technology and a larger bank model pervades our area. That concerns me because we do want people to be able to have that financial access and learning so that they're more astute in their own banking. And yet, when you're dropping calls and you can't access technology in that way, it's just a big problem in the banking side. So.
Serena, do you find the same issue, some of these same issues in terms of the difficulties in day-to-day?
Oh, yes, for sure. Yeah, we have a broadband issue, I would say. I know personally through the 2 last years of high school, I did college concurrent classes, and 3 of those that I took were online. So say I was at home and I had a deadline at 5 p.m. for something. If there was a thunderstorm or even rain, our Wi-Fi connection at home would go out. And so then I wouldn't be able to turn in my work, so that would affect me. And as I previously mentioned, my grandma has medical issues, so she uses the computer for those sorts of things. So if broadband was to go out, that would affect her as well. And also in my community, a lot of our schoolwork is now based through technology, through computers. And so if we were to lose that access, then we would basically be wasting a day in school because everything we use is on screens, basically. So that definitely does affect us.
So I'd like to talk a little bit about what each of you see as the most fundamental drivers for rural communities to thrive, and where do you see progress in those areas? What are the real things you think are fundamental to these communities making progress? You want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of the strategies that were being shown in the NPR piece, I mean, people thrive when they have choice, when they have access, when they have reliable health education. I mean, to be competitive and to be able to advance your human capital, you need to just have choice and availability. And I think that's where, in some of our communities, this point of equity is leaving some of our communities behind.
I really want to underscore the importance of having a strong community development financial institution, locally based, in regions where we have high levels of rural persistent poverty. I mentioned some of the stats for rural places earlier, but we also know that in persistent poverty areas, we also see high rates of unemployment, high rates of being unbanked, low health outcomes, low education outcomes. And in many ways, CDFIs leverage impact finance to address each of those issues. I really want to talk about housing. Housing matters. It matters tremendously, not just from the standpoint of the individual benefits that accrue to people who live in a home. We certainly know that there are mental health benefits for children living in a home. There are education outcomes. All of those are associated with home ownership. But there is also a relationship between home ownership, particularly for low-income individuals, and voting. Low-income homeowners vote at higher rates than middle and upper-income homeowners. And in a region where voter suppression is actually not just ancient history, but a memory of people still living, it's incredibly important because it's only going to be through the ballot box that we change the conditions that create the necessity for this conversation in the first place. Let me tell you a story about a project we're doing in Eastmoor. Eastmoor is a community that was built on the other side of the town line in Moorhead, Mississippi, basically to disenfranchise black voters. It was built in the late 70s to move just enough black residents outside of town so that a white mayor could still stay in place. These homes were built so poorly that 20 of them have burned down due to faulty wiring or gas connections not being hooked up properly. And if this tragic history wasn't enough, there's sewage problems, all kinds of issues. Now, we had an opportunity. This goes back to my point about having a strong CDFI. community development financial institution through a partnership with NeighborWorks America, with Goldman Sachs, to Delta Regional Authority, to import capital into this place to rebuild every home. And when we went into the work to rebuild the home, we didn't just do it, bring in a crew, build a home, move on to the next one. No, we use it as a workforce training opportunity for local people. So just a couple of weeks ago, we had the opportunity to walk through one of the homes. Framing was up, the roof was on, and one of the young men who had worked on the home was showing us, bedroom's going to be there, bathroom's going to be there. It looked like a piece of art. And when we got done, he looked at us and he said, I've never built a home. And it was in that moment that I think we also saw what the importance of a strong community development financial institution can bring. And that's not just a home or even increased access to the ballot box, but it's dignity. That young man had a pride of place that one can only get by doing something to improve your home, going back to that first stat of making a difference and impact in one's community.
Serena, do you have thoughts about what are some of the things you think are most important for rural communities to thrive?
From a youth perspective in my community, I would say that extracurriculars are important because one thing that all of us know or have seen is that once youth get older, they want to move away from wherever you are. It could be a rural community, you could live in New York City, but you want to get away, you want to see something different. And I feel like our rural community is very family-based. We moved there whenever I was 3, but my parents are there, my sister's there, my grandparents are there, my aunt is there. We have so many connections in that community, and as well as there's other generations. And I feel like a lot of people stay there because of the extracurriculars and the mentors that we have through those programs. So in 4-H, we focus on head, heart, hands, and health. And we have mentors who tell us about mental health and teach us to be optimistic and have positivity. So one example, there's a girl who's just a couple years younger than me, but she's seen the depression and the anxiety building up in her elementary school-based kids. And that just blows me away that we have young children 10 and under facing those problems. But once she's seen that, she started her own community service project, and she calls it the Friendship Bench. And she got donations, and she actually built a bench, and she just wrote positive words all over it. And she placed these in all of the elementary schools within Pittsburgh County, Oklahoma. And so if you're ever feeling depressed about something or sad or overwhelmed, these kids can go sit there, and then a friend comes up to you to talk to you, to kind of calm you down and just let you know that everything's okay. And she was only able to do that because of the mentors that she had through 4-H that allowed her to see the issues that are out there. So not only 4-H, but we also have, obviously sports are a huge deal. And within Pittsburgh County, we've had state championships of baseball and softball and things like that, which have taught the kids life skills such as motivation, determination, don't give up, those sorts of things. So from a youth perspective, I would say extracurriculars are very important to have in rural communities because it teaches kids those lifelong skills that they may not get, because at our schools, we don't have a home economics class that teaches us things that we should learn, like how to buy a house or how to make food, things like that. Those are things that you have to learn at home. And kind of talking about the opioids and drug addiction things that we have, we do have a lot of people like that within Oklahoma. And if you have family like that, you need to have those mentorships somewhere else. And so you get those through being involved in your community.
So one final question as we wrap up, and I'd encourage the audience to start thinking of questions for any of our panelists. We're going to be moving to Q&A in just a few minutes. But could you talk just a little bit about what kinds of additional research or information would be helpful for you, for your work? What kinds of new data do you need or would you like to see or think is necessary to move your work forward?
So I know we'll probably cover a couple different things, but from my perspective, with the data that was shared in this poll, I would love a next iteration on job quality, because we're hearing nationally rave reviews about the economy and the low unemployment rate. But I think there's this aspect of job quality and stability that is different, and I would love to see that. When it comes to the opioid epidemic, this is such a tough problem, and one of the things Benedum's been doing is investing in some of the research and strategy on the state side to figure out what are the best kind of ways as a state to look at solutions and what's working, so sort of evidence-based practices. But another really compelling thing that we have found that's leading-edge data in some of our work, thanks to Kim Tiemann, our program officer, is this next wave of foster children, kids that are in kinship care and adoption. I know when you look at the opioid epidemic, there are now a lot of unintended consequences that are coming out of that. And it's also going to be costly. And for us, this is really important because in addition to the health and societal implications of the opioid epidemic, this is the human capital base for what we want our economies to be built on for the next generation. So I think that these unintended consequences of the opioid epidemic would mean a lot to health. And then lastly, there are so many hurdles on the policy front to really rolling out telemedicine and having that be effective, and to have some policy papers that are really informing at the state and national level on making telemedicine successful, so that people like the Benedum organization like the Benedum Foundation and the federal agencies that are looking at this can make these investments and know that it can actually be a tool for our rural communities.
Yeah?
I would like to continue to see more of everything. More subgroup analysis. I think it's really important as we come to these rural spaces that we create a narrative that is inclusive. So I think we need to make sure that the responses, that the views of people of color, of women, of people with disabilities, that it is inclusive and all-encompassing across the country. There was one of my colleagues, Ines Polonius with Communities Unlimited, tells a story of a rural community in Arkansas. It was a community where the grocery store was having challenges. And again, many of us can think of communities where there's a grocery store that either went under or is having challenges. It's a huge, when we talk with our members, our local people in our small towns, it's always one of the top priorities. We need a grocery store. So they were having challenges. And then it was a largely majority white community. There was a growing Latino population in that community, and a Latino family bought that grocery store, and when they retooled that grocery store for the changing demographics, it began to thrive. And I guess, again, it just is, I think what I love about that story is just, all of our demographics are changing. We live in America, and painting a picture of rural America that is inclusive should be our top priority. I would also like to see more questions around the financial insecurity. So we know that people have difficulty paying a $1,000 expense. I'd love to know, so how would a family pay that $1,000 expense? Would it be through skipping payments on other things, through family and friends, payday lenders, cash for title places? I'd love to know more there as well.
Great. Thank you. Serena, final thought.
Touching on what I previously said in my other statements, I would like to see some research on the education nationwide in rural communities. So as I said, we don't have home ec classes or anything like that. We get everything through extracurriculars. But do all rural communities have extracurriculars? Because I know at my school, outside of sports, we only have 3 other options. And although I thrived through 4-H and we have other people who have thrived through the other 2 options, we have some people who feel like they never found their click, I would say. So do all rural communities have extracurricular options, and what are those options compared to, say, inner city kids in schools and things like that? Do they have more options to kind of find their group, to thrive, to find their place in the world? And also, how does being involved with your community affect your mental health? Because I feel pretty strong-headed and confident, but that is because I have been active in 4-H and other organizations for as long as I can remember through all of my youthhood. So just, does that affect your mental health for youth? And just research on that.